You are on HOA busted. She tried to charge me for asking questions. The tow operator asked me if I lived here, and Karen screamed that he should not talk to violators. You have one chance to comply before I escalate. That was Heather Martinez, Vice President of the Summit Ridge Estates Association, standing beside a tow truck in the visitor parking row with a handheld plate scanner pointed at my sedan like it was a weapon. I had been home from my shift at the municipal garage for less than an hour. I live in Frederick, Maryland, in a neighborhood where the mailbox cluster is the unofficial courtroom and every parking space has a backstory. I work as a fleet mechanic for a municipal garage, which means I know exactly how tow protocols are supposed to work, and I know when someone is making up rules on the spot. Heather was doing exactly that. She had a clipboard in a clear sleeve held out between us. No readable text visible, but she kept tapping it like it was a legal summons. She wore a red blazer with the hood up even though it was not cold, and she had a pair of rubber gloves she snapped on for intimidation while she circled my car. The dusty, dry air kicked up grit near the curb and made the whole scene feel like a Western standoff. The tow driver was a guy in his 50s with a company polo and a nervous expression. He looked at me, then at Heather, then back at me. I could see him doing the math. Heather did not give him time to finish. She stepped between us and jabbed a finger toward my windshield. Your vehicle is parked in a guest spot. You are a resident. Residents cannot occupy guest parking even temporarily. This is a tow on-site violation. I took a breath. I had parked here because my assigned spot was blocked by a moving truck that morning and I was exhausted from a double shift. I planned to move the car as soon as the truck left. I said, I live here. My assigned spot is blocked. This is temporary. Heather shook her head. Temporary does not matter. The rule is clear. Guests only. You are not a guest. She turned to the tow driver. Hook it. The driver hesitated. He said, Ma'am, if he lives here and his spot is blocked, that is usually considered a reasonable exception. Heather snapped her head toward him. Do not talk to violators. You are contracted by this association to enforce our rules, not to make excuses for people who think they are above the rules. I have all day, and so does my fine meter. She raised the handheld plate scanner and scanned my plate. The device beeped angrily, a sharp electronic chirp that felt designed to humiliate. She looked at the screen and smiled. Confirmed. Resident plate. Violation logged. She turned back to the driver. I said, hook it. I pulled out my phone and started recording. I said, I am recording this. You are threatening to tow my vehicle from a guest spot when my assigned spot is blocked, and I notified management this morning. Heather stepped closer. The camera does not scare me. I have done this before and people fold every time. She said it with so much confidence that I knew she meant it. This was not her first rodeo. She had practiced this exact routine on other residents and won. I nodded like I accepted it, because I wanted her comfortable and careless. I did not say anything else. I just kept the camera on her and waited. The tow driver looked uncomfortable. He said, I need to see the authorization paperwork before I hook anything. Heather handed him a printed sheet from her clipboard. The driver squinted at it. He said, this does not have a signature from the property manager. It just says board authorization. Heather crossed her arms. I am the vice president. That is authorization. The driver shook his head. I need a signed order from management or a signed police authorization. That is company policy. Heather's face went red. She pulled out her phone and started typing furiously. Fine. I am calling the manager right now and you will have your signature in 2 minutes. Then you will hook this vehicle, and if you do not, I will have your company removed from our vendor list. The driver sighed and leaned against the truck. I stayed quiet. I had already sent an email to management that morning explaining the situation and asking for a temporary parking accommodation. I had not received a response yet, but I knew the email was time-stamped and saved. That was going to matter later. Heather paced while she talked on the phone. I could hear her side of the conversation. Yes, I need a signed tow authorization for a resident vehicle in guest parking. No, I do not care if he emailed you. The rule is the rule. Yes, right now. I am standing here with the tow operator and he is refusing to work without your signature. Fine. Send it to my email. I will print it and hand it to him. She hung up and turned to me. You think you are clever. You think an email buys you time. It does not. Management is sending the authorization right now and your car will be on a flatbed in 10 minutes. I said, if management authorizes a tow after receiving my accommodation request this morning, that is going to be a problem for them. Heather laughed. You can complain all you want. The board backs me. The manager backs me. No one is going to save you. A landscaping contractor was trimming hedges about 20 feet away. He was pretending not to listen, but I saw him glance over twice. I made a mental note. Witnesses matter. Heather's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and her smile widened. There it is. She pulled a portable printer out of a bag in her car and printed the sheet right there on the hood of the tow truck. She handed it to the driver. Signed authorization. Now hook it. The driver looked at the sheet. He said, "This just says approved by property manager. It does not have a name or a signature." Heather's voice went icy. That is a digital signature. It is valid. Hook the vehicle or I am calling your supervisor and having you replaced. The driver sighed again. He walked to the back of the truck and started unrolling the wheel lift. I said, I am going to move my car right now. My assigned spot is clear. Heather stepped in front of me. No. You had your chance. The tow is in progress. If you interfere, I will call the police and have you charged with obstruction. I looked past her at the driver. I said, I have proof that I notified management and requested accommodation. If you tow this vehicle, the management company is going to eat the cost when I dispute it. The driver stopped. He looked at Heather. He said, Ma'am, if he has proof that he notified management and requested accommodation, and management still authorized the tow, that is a liability issue for us. We do not tow vehicles with active disputes unless we have a police order. Heather's face twisted. There is no dispute. There is a violation and a tow authorization. Do your job. The driver shook his head. I am not hooking it without a police signature or a resolved dispute status from management. If you want to push this, you need to call the police and have them issue a tow order. Heather stared at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked toward the mailbox cluster, phone already in her hand. I am calling the police right now. You stay here and make sure he does not move that car. The driver looked at me. He said, I do not get paid enough for this. I said, I appreciate you following policy. He shrugged. I have been doing this for 20 years. I know when someone is playing games. If the cops show up and order a tow, I will hook it. Until then, I am not touching it. I moved my car to my assigned spot while Heather was on the phone. The moving truck was gone. I parked, locked the doors, and walked back to the visitor row. Heather saw me and her face went purple. She ended her call and stormed over. You moved the vehicle. That is obstruction. I told you the tow was in progress. I said, the tow was not in progress. The driver refused to hook it without a police order. I moved my car to my assigned spot, which is now available. There is no violation. Heather jabbed a finger at me. You moved it to avoid the tow. That is evasion. You still owe the tow fee and the violation fine. I said I do not owe anything. I was never towed. The driver is still standing right there. Heather turned to the driver. He shrugged. She turned back to me. You owe a call-out fee. The truck was dispatched. That is $200 plus the violation fine of $150. You will receive an invoice. I said, I am not paying a call-out fee for a tow that did not happen because your authorization was not valid. Heather pulled out her clipboard again. She flipped to a page and tapped it. The rules say any vehicle in violation is subject to fines and towing fees regardless of whether the tow is completed. You owe $350. You have 10 days to pay or we file a lien. I said, show me that rule. She held the clipboard up but angled it so I could not read the text. It is right here. Section 12, subsection D. I said, I want a copy of that rule. Email it to me. Heather smiled. You can request a copy from management. It will take 3 business days. I said, or you can email it to me right now since you have it on your clipboard. She shook her head. I do not work for you. You want documents, you follow the process. I pulled out my phone and opened the HOA management portal. I logged in and navigated to the parking rules section. I found section 12. I read subsection D out loud. Vehicles towed from association property are subject to towing fees and storage fees as determined by the contracted towing vendor. Fines for parking violations are assessed separately and are not contingent on tow completion. I looked up at Heather. It does not say call-out fees, it says towing fees. If the vehicle was not towed, there are no towing fees. Heather's jaw tightened. The call-out fee is part of the towing fee structure. You are splitting hairs. I said no. You are making up charges. I am not paying $350 for a tow that did not happen because you did not follow proper authorization procedures. Heather stepped closer. Her voice dropped. You think you are going to win this. You are not. I have been on this board for 6 years. I have handled hundreds of violations. You are just another resident who thinks reading the rules makes you special. I have all day, and so does my fine meter. She smacked the clipboard against her palm for emphasis. The sound was sharp and deliberate. The landscaping contractor looked over again. I saw him pull out his phone. I said I am not paying. If you want to file a lien, go ahead. I will dispute it, and I will win. Heather smiled. Disputing a lien costs money. Legal fees, hearing fees, processing fees. You will spend more fighting it than just paying the fine. That is how this works. People like you always fold when they see the bill. I said, people like me know how to read email chains and save timestamps. I notified management this morning. I have proof. If you file a lien based on a tow that did not happen and a fine that does not apply, I will file a complaint with the state, and I will copy every homeowner in this community. Heather's smile faded. She said, You are making a mistake. This does not end well for people who fight the board. I said, I guess we will see. She turned and walked to her car. She got in, slammed the door, and drove away. The tow truck followed. The driver gave me a nod as he passed. The landscaping contractor walked over. He said, That was wild. She tried to tow you for parking in a guest spot? I said, Apparently guests cannot be residents even temporarily. He laughed. That is insane. I work for half the people in this neighborhood. I park in guest spots all the time when I am doing jobs. She has never said anything to me. I said, You are not a resident. That is the difference. He shook his head. This place is crazy. Good luck, man. I went inside and pulled up my email. The message I had sent to management that morning was still sitting in my sent folder, timestamped at 7:43 a.m. It said, My assigned parking spot is currently blocked by a moving truck. I am temporarily parking in guest spot G7 until the truck clears. Please confirm this is acceptable or advise on alternative accommodation. Thanks. I had not received a response. That meant management either ignored my request or approved Heather's tow without reviewing my email. Either way, it was a problem for them. I screenshotted the email and saved it to 3 different places. 2 hours later, I received an email from the HOA management company. It was from a generic address, no name attached. The subject line said parking violation notice. The body said, "Your vehicle was observed in guest parking in violation of community rules. You have been assessed a fine of $150 and a tow call-out fee of $200. Total due, $350. Payment is due within 10 days. Failure to pay will result in a lien filing and additional fees." There was an attachment. I opened it. It was a photo of my car in the guest spot, time-stamped that morning at 8:15. The photo was taken from an angle that made it look like my car was the only vehicle in the lot, even though I knew the moving truck had been blocking my spot at that time. The photo was staged to make me look like I was abusing guest parking for no reason. I replied to the email. I said, "I notified management at 7:43 a.m. that my assigned spot was blocked and I was temporarily using guest parking. I did not receive a response or accommodation. The vehicle was not towed. I moved it to my assigned spot as soon as it was available. I am disputing the fine and the call-out fee. Please provide documentation showing that my accommodation request was reviewed and denied. And please provide the full rule citation that authorizes a call-out fee for a tow that did not occur." I sent the email and CC'd the board. Then I went to the HOA portal and requested a full copy of the parking rules and the vendor contract with the towing company. The portal said my request would be processed in 3 to 5 business days. I sat back and tried to process what had just happened. Heather had escalated from 0 to tow truck in under an hour. She had staged a photo to make me look worse. She was inventing fees and threatening liens. And she had said it herself, "I have done this before and people fold every time." That line stuck with me. She was running a system. She had refined this process. She knew exactly how to pressure people into paying fines they did not owe because fighting back was expensive and exhausting. But I was not going to fold. The next morning, I received another email. This one was from Heather directly. It said, "Your refusal to pay the assessed fines is noted. As of today, your account is marked delinquent. You are prohibited from using any common areas, including the pool, gym, and clubhouse, until your balance is cleared. Additionally, a late fee of $25 has been added to your account. Your new balance is $375. I read the email twice. Then I opened the HOA governing documents and searched for the word delinquent. I found the section on collections. It said delinquent accounts were defined as accounts with unpaid assessments or fines that were overdue by 30 days or more. I had received the first notice yesterday. It had not been 10 days, let alone 30. I replied to Heather's email. I said, "I received the fine notice yesterday. It is not overdue. Your email violates the governing documents. I am not delinquent, and you cannot restrict my access to common areas. Remove the late fee and the restrictions immediately." Her response came back in under 5 minutes. It said, "Your dispute does not stop the clock. The fine was assessed when the violation occurred. You are overdue as of today. Pay your balance or the restrictions remain in place." I forwarded the entire chain to management and CC'd the board president. I said, "Heather is restricting my access to common areas based on a fine I am disputing, and a timeline that does not match the governing documents. This is harassment. I need this resolved immediately." Management responded 3 hours later. It said, "We are reviewing your dispute. In the meantime, access restrictions will remain in place per board direction. Please allow 3 to 5 business days for a response." I closed the laptop and called my attorney. I do not usually have an attorney on speed dial, but I had used one 2 years ago for a landlord dispute and I still had his number. His name was Eric and he specialized in housing and HOA cases. I explained the situation. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "They are running a shakedown. The staged photo, the invented fees, the immediate delinquency status, that is all designed to pressure you into paying before you can organize a defense. Do you have the email where you notified management about the blocked spot?" I said, "Yes. Time-stamped and saved." He said, "Good. That is your proof that you acted in good faith and requested accommodation. The fact that they ignored your request and authorized a TOW anyway is going to be a problem for them. The call-out fee is bogus. There is no standard HOA rule that allows a call-out fee for a TOW that did not happen. The delinquency restriction is premature and probably violates your governing documents. You have a strong case." I said, "What do I do next?" He said, "First, send a formal dispute letter to management and the board. Cite the governing documents, include your email proof, and demand that the fine and fees be removed and the restrictions be lifted. Second, request a hearing. The governing documents probably give you the right to a hearing before any fine is finalized. Third, keep a log of every interaction with Heather and every email from management. If they continue to harass you, we can escalate to a cease and desist or even a lawsuit." I said, "How much is this going to cost?" He said, "If it stays at the dispute stage, not much. If it goes to a hearing, I can represent you for a flat fee. If it goes to court, we can talk about contingency if they are clearly in the wrong. For now, I would say budget a few hundred for the dispute letter and the hearing prep. If you win, you can probably recover your costs." I said, "Okay, let's do it." He said, "I will draft the dispute letter today. I need you to send me the email chain, the fine notice, Heather's delinquency email, and a copy of your governing documents. I will have the letter to you by tomorrow." I hung up and started gathering the documents. My attorney needs one more document today and the HOA is stalling to avoid providing it. I had requested the towing vendor contract through the portal, but the request was still pending. I needed that contract to prove that the call-out fee was not part of the standard fee structure. I called management. A woman answered. She said, "HOA management, this is Lisa." I said, "Hi. I submitted a document request through the portal 2 days ago. I need the towing vendor contract. Can you email that to me today?" She said, "Document requests take 3 to 5 business days." I said, "I understand, but I have a dispute hearing coming up and my attorney needs that contract today. Can you expedite it?" She paused. She said, "I can check with the manager." "Hold on." I waited. I heard muffled voices in the background. Then Lisa came back on. She said, "The manager says the contract is proprietary and we cannot release it without board approval." I said, "It is not proprietary. It is a vendor contract funded by homeowner assessments. I have a right to see it under state law." She said, "I understand, but I need board approval to release it. I will send a request to the board and let you know." I said, "When?" She said, 3 to 5 business days. I hung up. They were stalling. Heather knew the contract would expose the call-out fee as bogus, so she was blocking my access. I went to the Maryland Homeowners Association Act online and pulled up the section on records requests. It said homeowners had the right to inspect association records, including contracts, within 10 business days of a written request. It also said the association could charge a reasonable fee for copies, but could not deny access. I drafted a formal records request email. I said, "Under the Maryland Homeowners Association Act, I am requesting immediate access to the towing vendor contract between Summit Ridge Estates Association and the contracted towing company. This is a formal written request. You have 10 business days to comply." I am also requesting the board meeting minutes from the last 6 months and any correspondence between the board and the towing vendor. Please confirm receipt and provide a timeline for access. I sent the email to management, the board president, and Heather. Then I called Eric back and told him about the stalling. He said, "Good. That is evidence of obstruction. If they do not comply within 10 days, we can file a complaint. For now, keep pushing." If this story sounds familiar, hit the like button and subscribe, because HOA wars only get wilder from here. That night, I got a text from a neighbor I barely knew. Her name was Monica and she lived 3 doors down. The text said, "Hey, I heard what happened with Heather and the tow truck. I recorded the whole thing from my porch. If you need a witness, let me know." I called her. She answered on the first ring. I said, "You recorded it?" She said, "Yeah, I record everything. Heather has been running this neighborhood like a dictator for years. She fined me twice last year for garbage cans being out 10 minutes past the pickup window. I fought both fines and won, but it was exhausting. When I saw the tow truck, I started recording. I figured you would need it." I said, "Can you send me the video?" She said, "Already done. Check your email." I opened my email, and there it was. A 12-minute video showing the entire confrontation. Heather yelling at the tow driver, Heather scanning my plate, Heather threatening to call the police, Heather smacking her clipboard. The audio was clear. You could hear every word. I called Eric again. I said, "I have video of the entire confrontation." He said, "Send it to me right now." I forwarded the video. Eric called me back 10 minutes later. He said, "This is gold. She threatened obstruction charges, she invented a call-out fee, she admitted she has done this before. This video is going to end her." I said, "What do we do with it?" He said, "We include it in your dispute package. When you go to the hearing, you play this video and you watch the board squirm. If they try to uphold the fine after seeing this, we go to court and we win." The next day, Eric sent me the dispute letter. It was 4 pages long and it was brutal. It cited the governing documents, the Maryland Homeowners Association Act, my email proof, Monica's video, and the timeline discrepancies. It demanded that the fine and fees be removed, the delinquency status be lifted, and the access restrictions be rescinded. It also demanded a formal hearing within 14 days. I printed 3 copies and mailed them certified to management, the board president, and Heather. Then I emailed the letter to the full board and CC'd management. 2 days later, I received a response from the board president. His name was Alan, and he was a retired accountant who had been on the board for 10 years. His email said, "We have received your dispute letter and we are scheduling a hearing. The hearing will be held on March 15th at 7 p.m. in the clubhouse. You may bring 1 representative. The board will review your case and issue a decision within 10 days of the hearing." I replied and confirmed my attendance. I also said I would be bringing my attorney. Heather sent me a separate email the same day. It said, "Your dispute is noted. However, the fines and restrictions remain in place until the board makes a final decision. Continued refusal to pay may result in additional penalties." I did not respond. There was no point. She was doubling down because she thought she could outlast me. The day before the hearing, I received the towing vendor contract. It came in an email from Lisa at management with no explanation. The contract was 8 pages long. I read it twice. There was no mention of call-out fees. The fee structure included a base tow fee, mileage fees, and storage fees. That was it. I forwarded the contract to Eric. He called me an hour later. He said, "They are screwed. There is no call-out fee in the contract. Heather invented it. When you show this at the hearing, they are going to have to drop the fine or admit they made up a fee structure." I said, "What about the photo?" He said, "The photo is staged. You can prove it with the timestamp on your email and the video showing the moving truck. The photo was taken to make you look bad, but the timeline does not support her story. We are going to shred this case. The hearing was scheduled for 7 p.m. I arrived at 6:45 with Eric. The clubhouse was a small room with folding chairs and a long table at the front. The board sat behind the table, Alan, Heather, and 2 other members I did not recognize. There were about a dozen residents in the chairs. Monica was in the front row with her phone. Alan called the meeting to order. He said, "We are here to review a dispute filed by one of our residents regarding a parking violation fine and associated fees. The resident has requested a hearing. We will hear his statement, review the evidence, and issue a decision." He gestured to me. I stood up. Eric stood beside me. I said, "My name is John. I live at 142 Summit Ridge Drive. On March 2nd, I temporarily parked in a guest spot because my assigned spot was blocked by a moving truck. I notified management that morning at 7:43 a.m. and requested accommodation. I did not receive a response. At approximately 9 a.m., Heather Martinez arrived with a tow truck and attempted to tow my vehicle. The tow did not occur because the driver refused to hook the vehicle without a valid police order. I moved my car to my assigned spot as soon as it was available. I was then assessed a fine of $150 and a call-out fee of $200. I am disputing both charges. Alan nodded. He said, "Do you have evidence to support your dispute?" I said, "Yes. I have the email I sent to management that morning. I have video of the confrontation. I have the towing vendor contract showing that call-out fees are not part of the fee structure. And I have witness testimony from a neighbor who recorded the entire incident." Heather leaned forward. She said, "The email does not matter. The rule is clear. Residents cannot park in guest spots. The call-out fee is valid because the truck was dispatched." Eric stepped forward. He said, "The email absolutely matters. It shows that my client acted in good faith and requested accommodation. Management failed to respond. The governing documents require reasonable accommodation for temporary parking issues. The call-out fee is not listed in the vendor contract. You cannot charge a fee that does not exist in the contract." Alan looked at Heather. He said, "Do you have documentation showing that the call-out fee is part of the vendor agreement?" Heather hesitated. She said, "The fee structure is standard industry practice. The contract may not list it specifically, but it is implied." Eric said, "Implied fees are not enforceable. The contract is the binding document. If the fee is not in the contract, you cannot charge it." Alan looked uncomfortable. He said, "Let's see the video." I handed Monica's phone to Alan. He played the video on a laptop connected to a projector. The room watched in silence. You could hear Heather yelling at the tow driver. You could hear her say, "I have done this before, and people fold every time." You could hear her threaten me with obstruction charges. When the video ended, the room was silent. Alan cleared his throat. He said, "This is concerning." Heather's face was red. She said, "That video is out of context. I was enforcing the rules." Eric said, "The video shows you admitting that you use this tactic to pressure residents into paying fines they do not owe. That is extortion." Heather slammed her hand on the table. "That is not extortion, that is enforcement." Alan held up a hand. He said, "Let's take a break. The board will deliberate and we will reconvene in 15 minutes. The board went into a side room. The residents in the chairs started whispering. Monica leaned over and said, "That was brutal. She looked like she was going to explode." I said, "Thanks for the video. That made the difference." She said, "No problem. She has been doing this for years. It is about time someone fought back." 15 minutes later, the board came back. Alan sat down and shuffled some papers. He said, "After reviewing the evidence, the board has decided to drop the fine and the call-out fee." We acknowledge that the resident notified management and requested accommodation, and that management did not respond in a timely manner. We also acknowledge that the call-out fee is not listed in the vendor contract and cannot be enforced. The delinquency status and access restrictions will be lifted immediately. I felt a wave of relief. Heather stared at the table. She did not look up. Alan continued. He said, however, the board is also implementing new procedures to prevent future disputes. Effective immediately, all parking violations will require a written notice with a 48-hour cure period before any enforcement action is taken. All fines and fees must be listed in the governing documents or the vendor contract, and all tow authorizations must be signed by the property manager and reviewed by the board president. Heather stood up. She said, "This is a mistake. If we give residents 48 hours to cure every violation, people will abuse the system." Alan said, "The new procedures are designed to protect the association from liability. This hearing has made it clear that our current enforcement practices are not sustainable." Heather grabbed her clipboard and walked out. The door slammed behind her. Alan looked at me. He said, "I apologize for the way this was handled. The board will be reviewing all recent fines and ensuring that they comply with the new procedures." I said, "Thank you." Eric said, "We also expect a formal apology letter and confirmation that no negative marks will remain on my client's account." Alan nodded. He said, "You will receive both within the week." The meeting ended. Monica walked out with me. She said, "That was the best board meeting I have ever seen. Heather looked like she was going to have a stroke." I said, "I could not have done it without your video." She said, "Any time. If she tries anything else, let me know." I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days after the hearing, I received an email from Alan. It said, "The board has received a complaint from Heather Martinez regarding your conduct at the hearing. She claims you harassed her and created a hostile environment. The board is opening an investigation." I stared at the email. I could not believe it. Heather was retaliating. I forwarded the email to Eric. He called me 10 minutes later. He said, "This is retaliation. She lost at the hearing and now she is trying to flip the script. Do not respond to the complaint. Let me handle it." Eric sent a letter to the board the same day. It said, "Any investigation into my client's conduct at the hearing is retaliatory and violates his rights under the governing documents. My client exercised his right to dispute a fine and present evidence. Heather Martinez's complaint is baseless and appears to be an attempt to harass my client after losing the dispute. If the board proceeds with this investigation, we will file a formal complaint with the state and pursue legal action for harassment and retaliation." The investigation was dropped 2 days later. Alan sent a brief email saying the complaint had been reviewed and no further action would be taken. But Heather was not done. A week later, I noticed a new rule posted in the HOA portal. It said, "Effective immediately, all vehicles parked in guest spots must display a guest pass issued by management. Guest passes are valid for 24 hours and must be renewed daily. Residents may not obtain guest passes for their own vehicles." It was a direct response to my dispute. Heather was closing the loophole. But the rule was so strict that it was going to cause problems for everyone, not just me. Guests would have to go to the management office every day to renew their passes. Contractors and service workers would have to do the same. It was going to be a nightmare. I posted about the new rule in the neighborhood group chat. Within an hour, a dozen residents were complaining. Someone said, "This is insane. My mom visits for a week every summer. She is supposed to drive to the office every day?" Someone else said, "What if the office is closed? What if it is a weekend?" Another resident said, "This is Heather's revenge. She lost the hearing, so now she is making life harder for everyone." Monica posted a poll in the group chat. The question was, should we petition the board to reverse the guest pass rule? Within 2 hours, 60 residents had voted yes. Monica organized a neighbor petition that forces a vote during the meeting. She drafted a petition asking the board to rescind the guest pass rule and adopt a more reasonable policy. She collected signatures from 80 residents and submitted the petition to the board 3 days before the next monthly meeting. The board meeting was packed. Every chair was filled and people were standing in the back. Alan opened the meeting and said, "We have received a petition from 80 residents requesting that the board rescind the guest pass rule and adopt a more reasonable policy. The board will discuss the petition and take a vote." Heather stood up. She said, "The guest pass rule is necessary to prevent abuse of guest parking. Residents have been using guest spots as overflow parking, and it is causing congestion." A resident in the front row said, "That is not true. The only abuse was your attempt to tow someone for parking in a guest spot when his assigned spot was blocked." Another resident said, "The guest pass rule is punishing everyone because you lost one dispute." Heather's face went red. She said, "This is not about one dispute. This is about maintaining order and enforcing the rules." Alan said, "The petition has 80 signatures. That is more than half of the homeowners in this community. The board has to take that seriously." Heather said, "The board makes the rules, not the residents. If people do not like the rules, they can vote us out at the next election." Someone in the back yelled, "Maybe we will." Alan held up a hand. He said, "Let's stay civil. The board will vote on the petition. All in favor of rescinding the guest pass rule and adopting a more reasonable policy, say aye." 2 board members said aye. Heather and 1 other member stayed silent. Alan said, "The motion passes. The guest pass rule is rescinded. The board will work with management to draft a new policy that balances access and enforcement." Heather stood up and walked out. The door slammed behind her. After the meeting, Monica pulled me aside. She said, "I found something. You need to see this." She handed me her phone. It was open to a folder of photos. She said, "These are the staged photos Heather took for violations over the last 6 months. I got them from another board member who is sick of her. Look at the timestamps." I scrolled through the photos. Every photo was taken at an angle that made the violation look worse than it was. A garbage can 2 feet from the curb looked like it was blocking the street. A car parked 6 inches over a line looked like it was taking up 2 spots. And every photo had a timestamp that did not match the actual violation time. I said, "How did you get these?" Monica said, "The board member sent them to me anonymously. He said Heather has been manipulating photos for years to justify fines. He wants her gone, but he does not want to be the one to blow the whistle." I said, "Can I send these to my attorney?" She said, "That is why I am showing you." I forwarded the photos to Eric. He called me the next morning. He said, "This is fraud. She has been doctoring evidence to extort fines. If you file a formal complaint with the state, she could face criminal charges." I said, "I am not trying to send her to jail. I just want her to stop." He said, "Then use this as leverage. Let the board know you have the photos. Tell them you will file a complaint unless they remove her from the board and implement oversight policies." I thought about it. I did not want to destroy Heather's life, but I also did not want her to keep abusing residents. I decided to take Eric's advice. I emailed Alan. I said, "I have evidence that Heather has been staging violation photos and manipulating timestamps to justify fines. I have photos showing discrepancies between the alleged violation times and the actual timestamps. I also have testimony from other residents who have been targeted with similar tactics. I am willing to provide this evidence to the board. However, if the board does not take action to address this issue, I will file a formal complaint with the state." Alan called me that night. He said, "I have seen the photos. I had no idea this was happening. The board is going to meet tomorrow to discuss this. I cannot promise what the outcome will be, but I can promise we are taking this seriously. The board met the next day. I was not invited, but Monica was there as a resident observer. She texted me updates throughout the meeting. The board reviewed the photos. Heather denied manipulating them. She claimed the timestamps were correct and that the angles were chosen to clearly show the violations. The other board members did not buy it. One member said the photos were clearly staged. Another said the timestamp discrepancies were impossible to explain. Alan proposed a motion to remove Heather from her position as vice president and assign her to a non-enforcement role. The motion passed 3-1. Heather was the only no vote. Monica texted me, "She is done." They stripped her of enforcement authority and reassigned her to the landscaping committee. She is furious. I felt a mix of relief and guilt. I had not wanted to destroy her, but I also knew she had brought this on herself. The following week, the board adopted an enforcement checklist that limits Karen tactics. The checklist required written notices with photos, 48-hour cure periods, management approval for all fines, and board review for any fine over $100. It also required that all violation photos be submitted with unedited metadata, and that any discrepancies be flagged for review. Alan sent an email to all residents explaining the new policies. He said, "The board is committed to fair and transparent enforcement. We acknowledge that recent enforcement actions have caused concern and frustration. The new policies are designed to protect homeowners and ensure that violations are handled consistently and fairly." A week after the new policies were announced, I received an email from Heather. It was short. It said, "You won. Are you happy now?" I did not respond. But the story was not over. A month later, I was at the mailbox cluster when I overheard two neighbors talking. One of them said, "Did you hear? Heather resigned from the board. She said she is moving out of state." The other neighbor said, "Good riddance. She made this place a nightmare." I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired. The whole ordeal had taken months of stress, legal fees, and constant vigilance. But it was over. Karen's staged photos got used against her. A neighbor petition that forces a vote during the meeting had stripped her of power. And the board adopted an enforcement checklist that limits Karen tactics. A few weeks later, I ran into Monica at the mailbox cluster. She said, "Did you hear the latest? The management company got fired on the spot and the board hired an interim manager who is freezing enforcement until an audit finishes." I said, "What happened?" She said, "Alan found discrepancies in the management company's financial reports. There were fees being charged that were not authorized by the board. There were vendor contracts that were never reviewed. The board voted to terminate the contract and bring in an independent auditor to review everything. The new interim manager is a retired HOA lawyer. He does not play games." I said, "That is huge." Monica said, "Yeah. It turns out Heather was not the only problem. The management company was enabling her because they were getting kickbacks from the towing vendor. The whole system was corrupt." I shook my head. I said, "How did no one catch this earlier?" Monica said, "Because no one fought back. You were the first person to stand up and demand transparency. Once you opened the door, everyone else started asking questions." I did not know what to say. I had just been trying to protect myself. I had not set out to expose a corrupt system. But that is what had happened. The audit took 3 months. When it was finished, the new interim manager sent a report to all residents. The report found that the management company had overcharged homeowners by thousands of dollars in unauthorized fees. It found that the towing vendor had been paid inflated rates, and that Heather had received gift cards from the vendor in exchange for tow authorizations. It found that several board members had approved contracts without reviewing them. The report recommended that the board file a lawsuit against the management company and the towing vendor to recover the overcharged fees. It also recommended that the board adopt stricter financial oversight policies and require annual audits. The lawsuit was filed 2 weeks later. I was not directly involved, but Eric told me that the case was strong and that the board was likely to win a significant settlement. A year later, I got an email from Alan. He was no longer board president. He had stepped down after the audit revealed that he had signed off on several questionable contracts without reviewing them. The email said, "I wanted to reach out and thank you for standing up when no one else would. The audit and the lawsuit would never have happened if you had not fought back. The community is in a better place now because of you." I replied and thanked him. I did not say much else. The whole experience had taught me that HOAs are only as good as the people running them, and that corruption thrives when residents stay silent. I still live in Summit Ridge Estates. The new board is better. The new management company is transparent. The enforcement policies are fair. And Heather is gone. I do not know where she moved, and I do not care. Every time I park in my assigned spot, I think about that morning when the tow truck circled like a shark and Heather screamed at the driver. I think about the handheld scanner beeping angrily and the clipboard she smacked against her palm. I think about her catchphrase, "I have all day," and so does my fine meter. She was wrong. She did not have all day. And her fine meter ran out the moment I decided to fight back. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.